Hi, I'm Dave Palmer. Thanks for joining me on this video as we talk about the 6 most controversial teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Theologica. A few things before we get started. First of all, these are going to go in ascending order, which means that number 1 is going to be the most controversial, and number 6, which I will start with, will be the least controversial, but I still think a very controversial part of the Summa Theologica. Number 2, why am I doing this? You know, I love the Summa. These are, some would say, the more unsavory aspects of the Summa, but I think that you, if you're going to be studying the Summa, you've got to be able to, first of all, know that these teachings exist, and also be able and be prepared to defend them. If somebody were to say, well, did St. Thomas Aquinas teach this? Well, you got to be able to say, well, yeah, he did, but here's why I think he did. Secondly, in this video, for the sake of time, I am not going to defend or apologize for the teachings, okay? This is basically this is what he teaches. I'm using his own words, and I am not here to defend it or apologize for any of these. I could do those in other videos, okay? So let's get straight to it. The 6 most controversial teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Theologica, and number 6 is dealing with usury. Okay, this is the least controversial of the 6, as I mentioned before, whether it is a sin to take usury for money lent. Now today, we just are used to, if you're going to get a loan from a bank, you're going to pay extra, you're going to pay interest, right? But back in the 13th century, St. Thomas Aquinas taught that that was a sin, that you're not allowed to do that. Now, here's the reason. I'll go through this very quickly. He said to take usury for money lent is unjust in itself, because this is to sell what does not exist. And this evidently leads to inequality, which is contrary to justice. In order to make this evident, we must observe that there are certain things, the use of which consists in their consumption. Thus, we consume wine when we use it for drink, and we consume wheat when we use it for food. Wherefore, in such like things, the use of the thing must not be reckoned apart from the thing itself, and whoever is granted use of the thing is granted the thing in itself. For that reason, to lend things of this kin is to transfer ownership. Okay, so it's strictly giving the person the wheat or the wine, and it is what it is, and you're lending it to the person, right? To lend things of this kin. Okay, accordingly, if a man wanted to sell wine separately from the use of the wine, he would be selling the same thing twice, or he would be selling what does not exist, wherefore he would evidently commit a sin of injustice. In the like manner, he commits an injustice who lends wine or wheat and asks for double payment, that is, one, the return of the thing in equal measure, the other, the price of the use, which is called usury. Now, money, according to the philosopher Aristotle, was invented chiefly for the purpose of exchange, and consequently, the prospect and principal use of money is its consumption or alienation, whereby it is sunk in exchange. Hence, it is by its very nature unlawful to take payment for the use of money lent, which payment is known as usury. And just as a man is bound to restore other ill-gotten goods, so is he bound to restore the money which he has taken by usury. Okay, so clearly not something that is still in effect in the 21st century today. All right, the 5th most controversial teaching of the Summa Theologica is Thomas's teaching on lies. Okay, have you heard about this? Thomas teaches that every lie is a sin. Okay, so if I were to say to you, hey, I bought a new dog, will you tell me if you think this is a pretty dog? Here it is. All right, and if you were to say, yeah, that's a pretty dog, very, very attractive. Okay, it's a white lie, what we would call it today. Thomas would not agree. Thomas is saying that's a sin, okay? Because if you think that's an ugly dog, you need to say, no, I don't think that's a pretty dog. That's an ugly dog, okay? An action that is naturally evil in respect of its genus can by no means be good and lawful, since in order for an action to be good, it must be right in every respect, because good results from a complete cause, while evil results from any single defect, as Dionysius asserts. Now, a lie is evil in respect of its genus, since it is an action of bearing an undue matter. For as words are naturally signs of the intellectual acts, it is unnatural and undue for anyone to signify by words something that is not in the mind. Hence, the philosopher says that lying is in itself evil and to be shunned, while the truthfulness is good and worthy of praise, and therefore every lie is a sin, as St. Augustine declares. Okay, so if you say that dog is pretty, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, you have sinned. Okay, isn't that interesting? All right, the fourth most controversial teaching in the Summa Theologia. Again, we're getting more controversial as we go along. Is it lawful to steal through stress of need? Okay, you go into a grocery store and you steal meat or bread or thing of hot dogs or milk or eggs. Thomas would say you're not always sinning. Okay, that's not always sin. It's not always improper, and this is why. He says things which are of human right cannot derogate from natural right or divine right. Now, according to the natural order established by the divine providence, inferior things are ordained for the purpose of succoring man's needs by their means. Wherefore, the division and appropriation of things which are based on human law do not preclude the fact that man's needs have to be remedied by means of these very things. Hence, whatever certain people have in superabundance is due by natural law to the purpose of succoring the poor. Okay, since, however, there are many who are in need, while it is impossible for all to be succored by means of the same thing, each one is entrusted with a stewardship of his own things, so that out of them he may come to the aid of those who are in need. That nevertheless, if the need be so manifest and urgent that it is evident that the present need must be remedied by whatever means it be at hand, for instance, when a person is in some imminent danger and there is no other possible remedy, then it is lawful for a man to succor his own need by means of another's property by taking it either openly or secretly. Nor is this, properly speaking, theft or robbery. Okay, this is clearly not something that we think of today. We always think, black and white, stealing is stealing. It's always wrong. St. Thomas Aquinas did not think that was the case. All right, the third most controversial teaching in the Summa Theologia had to do with the female sex. Okay, he asks in one article whether the woman should have been made in the first production of things. Okay, at the beginning of time, should woman have been made in the first place? In one of the objections, he quotes Aristotle, who of course lived before the time of Christ, and said it would seem that the woman should not have been made in the first production of things, for the philosopher says that the female is a misbegotten male, but nothing misbegotten or defective should have been in the first production of things. Therefore, a woman should not have been made at the first production. Now, this is an objection, so this is something that Thomas is not going to agree with, but listen to how he responds. He says, as regards the individual nature, woman is defective and misbegotten. Okay, so he's not disagreeing with Aristotle. For the active force in the male seed tends to the production of a perfect likeness in the masculine sex, while the production of a woman comes from defect in the active force or from some material indisposition, for even from external influence, such as that of a south wind, which is moist, as the philosopher observes. Okay, so he's using science from back before Christ and something that Aristotle came up with, right? Okay, on the other hand, though, he says, as regards human nature in general, woman is not misbegotten, but is included in nature's intention as directed to the work of generation. Okay, because women are necessary along with men to have babies, right? That's what he means. Now, the general intention of nature depends on God, who is the universal author of nature. Therefore, in producing nature, God formed not only the male, but the female as well. So God clearly knew what he was doing in producing females. All right, now here's another objection that he uses. Further, subjection and limitation were a result of sin. For to the woman was it said after sin, thou shalt be under the man's power. And Gregory said that where there is no sin, there is no inequality. But woman is naturally of less strength and dignity than man, for the agent is always more honorable than the patient, as Augustine says. Therefore, women should not have been made in the first production of things before sin. Now, again, this is the objection. Thomas's response, though, is interesting. He says, subjection is twofold. One is servile, by virtue of which a superior makes use of a subject for his own benefit, and this kind of subjection began after sin. There is another kind of subjection, which is called economic or civil, whereby the superior makes use of his subjects for their own benefit and good, and this kind of subjection existed even before sin. For good order would have been wanting in the human family if some were not governed by others wiser than themselves, So by a kind of subjection, woman is naturally subject to man because in man the discretion of reason predominates, nor is inequality among men excluded by the state of innocence. Okay, so he is making a distinction between the man and the woman, both before original sin and after original sin as well. All right, moving on to the second most controversial teaching in the Summa Theologica, and that has to do with what's called the unnatural vice, or sodomy as it's often called. Thomas asks whether it is the greatest sin among the species of lust, and he is going to say yes, it is. In every genus, worst of all is the corruption of the principles on which the rest depend. Now, the principles of reason are those things that are according to nature, because reason presupposes things as determined by nature before disposing of other things according as it is fitting. This may be observed both in speculative and in practical matters. Wherefore, just as in speculative matters, the most grievous and shameful error is that which is about things, the knowledge of which is naturally bestowed on man, so in matters of action, it is most grave and shameful to act against things as determined by nature. Okay, so he's talking about things that we naturally know, or things that are instilled in us that we don't really have to be taught. And so when we violate those, that's the greatest of sin, right? Therefore, he says, since by the unnatural vices man transgresses that which has been determined by nature with regard to the use of venereal actions having to do with sexuality, it follows that in this matter, this sin is gravest of all. After it comes incest, which is contrary to the natural respect which we owe persons related to us. And he goes on to rank all the various vices of sexuality, which is really interesting, but I'm not going to include all of that. All right, the number one most controversial teaching in the entire Summa Theologica, according to me, you may disagree, and you can let me know about that, is his teaching on whether it is lawful to kill sinners. And Thomas is going to say, it is lawful to kill dumb animals insofar as they are naturally directed to man's use, as the imperfect is directed to the perfect. Now every part is directed to the whole, as imperfect to perfect, wherefore every part is naturally for the sake of the whole. For this reason we observe that if the health of the whole body demands the excision of a member, the cutting off of a member, through its being decayed or infectious to the other members, it will be both praiseworthy and advantageous to have it cut away. Now every individual person is compared to the whole community as part to whole. Therefore, if a man be dangerous and infectious to the community on account of some sin, it is praiseworthy and advantageous that he be killed in order to safeguard the common good, since a little leaven corrupteth the whole lump. That's what St. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 5:6. All right, one other thing he says, whether heretics ought to be tolerated. Okay, this is in a different part of the Summa, and he said with regard to heretics, 2 points should be observed. One on their own side, the other on the side of the church. On their own side, there is the sin whereby they deserve not only to be separated from the church by excommunication, but also to be severed from the world by death. For it is much graver matter to corrupt the faith which quickens the soul than to forge money which supports temporal life. Wherefore, if forgers of money and other evildoers are forthwith condemned to death by the secular authority, much more reason is there for heretics, as soon as they are convicted of heresy, not only to be excommunicated, but to be put to death. On the part of the church, however, there is mercy, which looks to the conversion of the wanderer, wherefore she condemns not at once, but after the first and second admonition, as the apostle directs. After that, if he is yet stubborn, the church, no longer hoping for his conversion, looks to the salvation of others by excommunicating him and separating him from the church, and furthermore delivers him to the secular tribunal to be exterminated, therefore, from the world by death. Okay, so I think the treatment of sinners and also the treatment of heretics would probably, by 21st century standards, be considered the most controversial of all of St. Thomas Aquinas's teachings in the Summa Theologica. All right, there you have it. My, in order, 6 most controversial teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa. Let me know if you agree, and any comments or questions or observations are very welcome. God bless you. Thank you for watching.